If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's the scariest or strangest thing you've seen in a national park or national forest? This happened on private property, but it's a creepy story that took place in the woods, so it kinda qualifies. Plus, this morning was opening day for deer season, and we were deer hunting when it happened. My cousin owns land in western Wisconsin where there's lots of hills and lots of deer. It's tradition for all of us to hunt on his property. My dad, cousin, and all their friends pitched in to build a hunting shack on the property and put up tree stands. We hunt on a schedule so none of us hunt in the same area at the same time, both for our safety and in hopes of getting a deer. My dad and I took an ATV and headed up a hillside. The sun wasn't quite up yet and we wanted to get set for sunrise. We marked which hill we were going up on the schedule inside the hunting shack. Nobody else was there yet, but we marked it anyways in case my cousin and his daughter showed up. We waited until about 9 a.m. and didn't see a thing. Not even as much as a squirrel. We decided to go get some coffee to warm up, and then head back out. I followed my dad down the path back to the ATV, and we'd stop every so often to listen for deer. The only noises I heard were my footsteps and my dad's. About halfway to the ATV, I heard something else. It only happened when my dad and I walked. When my dad and I walk during deer hunting, I mimic his footsteps so we make less noise. I step at the same time as him. However, something behind me was making noise. It was like something was mimicking my footsteps. I spun around and peered into the trees. The sun still wasn't over the top of the hill yet, so we were in quite a bit of shade. I didn't see anything, so I continued to follow my dad down the hill. But I heard it again. This time, I turned around when we were still walking, and I saw something duck behind a tree. A pale face poked out from about 30 yards up the hill, and hid behind the tree again. It poked out again, and this time, stayed staring down at us. I stopped and hit my dad's shoulder. He turned, and saw it too. "Get to the four-wheeler," he whispered, and I didn't hesitate. I stared it down as my dad started up the ATV, and as we departed, the face's dark little shoulder came out from behind the tree, followed by the rest of its gnarled, malformed body. My dad hit the throttle and we got back to the hunting shack as soon as we could. Nobody else was there, so we got in the truck and left. I haven't been in those woods since. My dad was, and got a deer this morning, and acts like this never happened. I still think about it far too often. I was driving home from Yosemite 4 years ago and I stopped on the side of the road to go pee. I then heard birds in the distance completely stop chirping. It was around 5 p.m. BTW. I knew that a bear was nearby, so I cut it short and started to walk back to my car, which was like 30 feet away. Just as I turned around to walk back, I heard an insanely loud sound that was like a mix between a scream and air raid siren. It sounded really close and I knew for a fact that it wasn't a bear or cougar anymore, and I've never heard something so strange and loud, so I ran as fast as I fucking can back to my truck and started it. Right before I drove off I heard it again, but it was even louder and it sounded even more creepy. I still think about it until this day and I still don't know what kind of creature it could have been. Can someone please convince me that what I heard was normal or if it was some kind of cryptid? Please help, I am terrified to go in the woods. I was traveling solo around the Olympic Peninsula in Washington state and making various stops in the Olympic National Park. I decided to stop in Quinault for the first time and took a random road that dead-ended at a beautiful spot at the edge of the Quinault River. There was an ancient footbridge that led across the river, but it looked like it might collapse if I tried to cross it, so I decided not to. It was off-season, and I was not in a tourist area. I was the only one there. It was so unusually hot outside that I decided that I needed to get in that water. I backed my car all the way to the edge of the dead-end road, faced it out in the direction I would need to leave, and started hiking through thick brush, down an embankment, to the edge of the water. There was no path. It was a pretty rugged area. It was mid-fall and I didn't have a suit since I didn't plan on swimming, so I just took my clothes off and got in the water in my bra and underwear. I had a nice swim, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched even though I was in the middle of nowhere. After about 5 minutes the creepy feeling was enough for me to want to head back, so I started to climb out, turned my back to the other side of the river and walked toward my clothes and shoes that I had left behind. When I turned around there was a big, tall man standing in plain view, just across from me on the other side of the river, but higher up on his embankment than I was on mine. He was wearing a poncho made of animal pelts, had long hair full of sticks and twigs, and looked like he had been living out in the wild for a very long time. We stood and stared at each other, me in frozen terror, for what felt like forever, when all of a sudden he frantically took off in the direction of the footbridge leading across the water. I grabbed my car key, tried to grab my clothes and shoes, but they got tangled up in some blackberry vines, so I left everything and went running for my life, through the thick brush and blackberries, barefoot in my underwear, trying to make it to my car before he made it across the river. There was no doubt in my mind that he was trying to harm me. When I made it out of the blackberries, I could see he was crossing the bridge toward me rapidly. I got to my car and flung my door open just as he arrived. I locked the doors while he pounded on the hood of my car, just screaming and grunting non-verbally. The moment he went for my driver's side door, I hit the gas and took off as fast as I could. I looked back and he was chasing after me. He must have run after my car for at least a mile until he faded from view. I was bleeding everywhere from running nearly naked through blackberries. I was wet, unclothed, shaking and crying. Had I hesitated for literally 10 seconds longer, I don't think I would have made it out alive. Even typing this story out again all these years later, I am starting to shake. I felt like I was being hunted. That is the only way I can describe it. I will never, ever go back to that area. Since that moment, I always bring a hiking buddy with me when I venture out into the forest. That day is going to haunt me for life. I have had many years of therapy and that experience is still as vivid as the day it happened. My friend and I would go camping pretty often near a pond and a big clearing that pretty much nobody knew about. We had never seen signs of anyone else being there, and it's hard to get to. It is on the edge of a national park/forest in California. One morning when we pull the truck up to the area we parked before the hike and we see 2 mountain lions having sex. That alone was enough for us to just call the trip a loss and turn back, but we decided to stick around for a bit to watch the lions. They finished up their business pretty quickly and kind of just hung around the area, so it was cool to see them. After about 10 minutes they perk up and are on alert. We have the windows up obviously so we can't hear anything. They get scared and run off, and from the direction they ran away from 3 deer come running through with a big ass bear chasing them. We haven't been back to that spot. A buddy and I were on a camping trip in the Poudre Canyon outside Fort Collins, Colorado. It was late in the season, so all of the campgrounds were closed. We found a random spot off of a random road. Both of us have a ton of experience and had camped all over CO and UT, but something about this particular spot was just off. Almost immediately, we found a blanket wrapped around a deceased, skeletal animal. We assumed it was just a pet that someone had thrown out, but it set the mood. We went hiking, climbed up a few hills and came across an abandoned tent wrapped up in a tree. I was certain we were going to find a body in it, but it was just filled with notebooks and a sleeping bag. We start hiking down the hill and end up walking down the side, very steep. As we are traversing down, we are hit with the smell of death. Nestled into a tree, on the side of a very steep hill, is a small towel with something clearly inside of it. We leave it be and hike down. This is probably 200 to 300 feet up the side of steep hill with the towel in a tree, facing the top of the hill. Clearly intentionally put here. We down some bourbon, build up some courage, and hike back up. Grab a stick, open up the towel. Inside, a very recently deceased owl. Somehow, someway, someone had killed this owl, wrapped it in a towel, hiked up a steep hill off a random mountain road, and stuck it beside a tree. We started a fire, slammed the bourbon, and got out of there in the morning. First time ever camping, it was for a field trip in 7th grade. God, I was miserable and I hated it, and I didn't want to be away from home. It was about 5 hours away. I couldn't sleep, so I got up in the middle of the night and walked outside, and I sat with a little book light to read in front of the cabin. I was so obsessed with Christopher Pike at that age, holy shit. Anyway. I was super unnerved, but I couldn't stand going back into that cabin and laying on this stupid, awful wooden manger type cot, so I stayed right there by the door. I had this weird feeling like I was being watched but felt safe enough because it was camp. But every now and then I just couldn't stop glancing up. It just felt weird, I can't explain it. Like hair on the back of your neck standing up weird. I guess I happened to move my book just right because the light caught on a pair of glowing eyes, like an animal, right in front of me. As a kid, I felt like they were right in front of me but must have been down the steps and a few yards back. Because I dropped the book and the light fell off to the side, I could just barely see that it was a goddamn mountain lion. I couldn't even see the full thing at first, just a paw, but then I followed it up. It saw me, and I saw it, and I could not move. In my mind I knew 2 things. 1. If I didn't move, someone was going to find a blood trail and then my half-eaten corpse, and 2. If I got attacked by a mountain lion because I was doing something I wasn't supposed to, my dad would be so mad. I have no idea how long I fumbled. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt like 10 years. I reached up behind me until I found the door handle and twisted until I fell into the cabin backward. Closed the door and got back into my stupid bed and laid there until sunrise. One girl woke up and I just told her the wind must have made the door bang. In the morning our teacher came to wake us up and I got in trouble for leaving my library book outside. I didn't want to get in even more trouble, so I didn't tell anyone what happened. When I was a kid, maybe 10, my parents took our family of 4 to Mark Twain National Forest. We did not go to a campground. For whatever reason, we arrived around dusk and we had to hurry to set up camp. Soon after, we discovered that we had forgotten a lantern and it became very dark. My stepfather was an alcoholic, and I mean drunk to boot, so there was a lot of yelling, and instead of lighting a campfire, we went to bed. As we all lie there, trying to sleep, we begin to hear dead leaves rustle in the distance, as if someone were walking through the forest. Time was passing slowly as we listened to the sound getting closer. My sister, 12, my mother, my drunk stepdad and myself were petrified, hoping that since we have no lights and because the person walking through the forest didn't have a flashlight, we may avoid notice. A few moments later, as the sound of shuffled walking was within just a few yards, the stranger stepped on a twig and it snapped. My father belted out a blood-curdling scream and my mother shrieked, "Let's get out of here." All 4 of us bolted out of the tent toward the car, my brave parents in the lead. After a few terrifying moments, we reached our Honda Civic hatchback and we took off for home. We never went back for our things and I hate camping to this day. I am 43 and I still dream about this. I found a bone altar once and a severed human hand in 2 different instances. Edit, when I was 8 or 9 my mom took me to a reservoir that I think was in it near a national park. She made baskets and things from natural materials and I went along to help collect. I wandered off a little and I was picking up trash. My mom gave me a nickel for each piece of trash I found, and things in a bag in a basket for collecting things. I saw what I thought but was a discarded glove on the lake shore and went to pick it up so I could put it in my bag and wheel. It wasn't a glove. It was someone's left hand from about a few inches the wrist into the arm. The person had been in the water a few days and I picked up their severed hand. I started screaming and I guess my hands clenched onto the dead hand. My mom came running and had to pry my hands open to drop it. We went to the closest gas station to call the cops, early/mid-90s and pre-cell phones, and they went out and collected it. From what I learned later, there had been a group of drunk teenagers with a power boat and one had fallen in or something and gotten hit by the boat. I found that chunk of him. They tried to convince me at the time it was a bear paw. I didn't talk for about 2 months and I still have problems with recently dead things. As to the bone altar, I went hiking/camping in college intending to make it to an area in southwestern Colorado. I had a stressful spring semester and needed space from people. I heard a group of people coming as I was heading back and went off into the woods to avoid them. During my detour to avoid them I got into a patch of thick woods. I ended up coming along all I could call an altar of sorts made out of all kinds of bones of different creatures. It was sort of table shaped and someone had strung up different bones and bits of metal on strings all around the area. I was so creeped out I backtracked back to the trail and got back to my car and left as quickly as I could. Haven't gone camping since. Back in 2010 I was doing a solo bike camping trip through the Gifford-Pinchot NF in Washington state. Doing a backroads trip from Portland to Seattle using the Baby Shoe Pass route if you're familiar with the area. One day I was near Big Tire Junction and looking for a campsite. My plan was generally to find a random Jeep trail and follow it until I saw a good campsite. The first trail I tried, I ran into a bear so I rang my bike bell a bunch and scared it away. I turned around to find a new trail. I eventually did and found a good spot on a random Jeep trail about 50 miles from the closest human habitation. I was at about 4,200 so the mosquitoes were horrible. I hadn't brought a tent so I crawled into my bag around 8:30 for some respite. Maybe 20 minutes after I went to bed I heard an engine. I peeked my head out and saw a truck driving down the trail. I locked eyes with the guy driving it and he passed my camp and disappeared a bit down the road. I pulled out my map and confirmed that the trail I was on ended after descending the canyon for a mile or two. What is this guy doing? Why is he here so far from literally anything? Then I realized there were 2 humans on planet Earth who knew where I was, me and this guy doing God knows what in the middle of a giant forest an hour away from any town or main road. Holy shit. I was pretty freaked but ended up staying put. 30 minutes later he came back up the trail, drove past me, and vanished. I had a hard time sleeping that night as I was nervous about the bear and the weirdo but nothing happened. The next night I camped at an abandoned campground near Taclick Lake. Despite a massive berm placed by the Forest Service, Some yahoos arrived and proceeded to get wild and drunk and started blasting away with their guns. They definitely didn't know I was there. Again, I hunkered down and woke up at 5 a.m. the next morning to slip out before they woke up. Weird trip, but damn do I miss having the kind of life where I could spend a week riding a bike in the woods alone. Sort of. Theodore Roosevelt was a hunter, but being such an avid outdoorsman, a biologist, and a historian, he was one of the few to recognize the falling patterns of large game. He knew that something had to be done to preserve the diminishing number of game. While he loved hunting, it wasn't just so he could continue to hunt. He truly loved large animals and wanted to see them thriving for all generations to witness. TR also set into place conservation laws that had nothing to do with hunting, such as protecting the Adirondacks in New York before it was cool. But your last point is essentially right. He recognized the value of the land beyond trees equals lumber. He knew we had to hold off on our resources long enough for them to become self-sustaining. While national parks are all about preservation and recreation, national forests are all about maintaining resources. They will be used, responsibly, for timber, grazing, fishing, and mining. That's the idea, at least. My friend was camping near the Appalachian Trail by himself for a few days. One night, as he was walking, he began to develop the sensation that he was being watched. So he looked around, and discovered his sensation was correct. The part of the path he was on at that moment was a gravel road, wide enough for a car to drive down. It was mostly flat at this stretch, with a steep incline on the right side. And to the right, a few feet up, maybe 15 feet back, there was a pair of big cat eyes. My friend saw a large tree limb on the ground, and without bending over, or turning his back to the cat, he wedged his foot under it, and kicked it up into the air, catching it with his hand. He then angrily waved it at the cat, shouting to get the hell away. And fortunately, it immediately did. Relieved, my friend slept in his car that night, instead of his tent, and he ultimately cut the trip short, and drove home that morning. It had been too dark to identify what type of cat it was, so he never was able to determine exactly what he had been stalked by. I live next to 2 national forests/parks. From June to July, there was a horrific fire that prompted evacuations. My family had about 3 hours to pack anything of value. Luckily, we didn't end up having to evacuate. So I had just gotten off of work, and so had my dad. I told them we should really consider evacuating. They didn't take my advice at first, but then we saw the mountain burning. First thing I did was get all of our legal documents. Birth certificates, medical files, etc. That took about a half an hour. Next, I helped my sister pack and get through her panic attacks. She was 8 at the time. It was absolutely heart-wrenching having to tell her that we can't take all of her stuffed animals and she had to pack only a few. I had to talk her out of only bringing her stuffed animals. I ended up packing a lot for her because she was just so sad. She ended up settling on a few of her favorites and an elephant stuffed animal she got from an ambulance when she was 4. Next, I checked on my other sister. She was oddly calm. She packed everything she wanted into a small bag and that was it. I went to help my parents, but they told me to go pack my stuff. I ended up packing some expensive stuff, like my purse collection. I also packed important items and my artwork and then had a mental breakdown. It was summer and I was on the top floor. I ended up overheating and yeah, it was bad. Next was packing animal stuff. At the time we had 12 hens, 2 guinea pigs and 2 dogs. We packed food for everyone and started getting stuff together. Harnesses, water bottles, food, bedding, hay, etc. By now the fire was halfway down the mountain. I grabbed the guinea pigs and put them in their transport cage. Put them by the door. My dad took a trailer from his boss. I wasn't allowed to help take anything outside, as I have life-threatening asthma and it would have been bad. Anyway, we eventually got everything moved/taken out and by then it was night. The fire had gotten to the base of the mountain on one side. We were all exhausted. I asked my parents if we could leave, but they said not yet. I have no idea how I fell asleep, but my sisters and I all slept next to the front door that night. It was very mesmerizing. I have no idea why, but I was in a trance. It was midnight, but the flames from the burning mountain lit up the sky. It was in a very eerie and haunting way, almost beautiful. The orange flames and purple smoke and the moonlight. Awful to say, I know, but it was like a painting. Anyway, about 2 a.m. I fell asleep. I read myself to sleep and watched the fire creep towards us. I woke up several times and thought I was dreaming, but gradually the flames were being put out. I woke up very early at about 6 a.m. The mountain was still burning, but the 1,000-foot flames were completely gone. I woke everyone up and we were all so grateful. A few of us were crying from joy. Several local fire departments had set up a fire line that night. That's what saved us. In the end, nobody died. A local firefighter was severely burned, but he's since recovered and is attending physical therapy. He was released from the hospital about a month or two ago. The night before we were prepping for evacuation, a bucket helicopter crashed. Again, nobody died. One house and several government buildings were burned. In total, about 35,000 acres were burned. That's the most horrific thing I think I've ever seen, though. I think the reason we were so affected by this is because we have had a house fire before. We were so lucky that this time we got to pack and rescue our animals. I live in New Mexico. My dad loves hunting and was even a hunting guide for elk half of my life. We were hunting in southern NM and got back to camp the first night and started making dinner. Mountain spaghetti hits different, strongly recommend. It was super dark but we had a fire and headlamps etc. It was about 9 p.m. and my dad had a baseball game playing over the radio. My cousin and I, myself being 10, him being 12, heard just beyond our camp out in the trees this horrible wailing sound. It was super low in pitch at first but bounced around as it progressed. It got closer and closer, taking brief pauses in between each wailing episode. When it's dark and you're in the mountains, your mind races, and being literal children, we thought we were dead. My dad grabbed a rifle, and considering he's been in the mountains his entire life, that was enough to make us run for the truck. My dad looked at us and said, "If I don't come back, lock the doors." Well, he was fucking with us, and it happened to be a group of wild horses that were pissed off because our camp inconvenienced them from their walking path. Another time my dad and I were walking through the woods and under a tree a grouse bird was hanging out, and we definitely startled it walking up behind it, and when it started flapping its wings it sounded like a fucking helicopter right next to us. I again thought we were dead. Being stalked while hiking in Arches, NP. So, Arches was bonkers busy this summer and my partner and I kept missing our chance to get in. We decide to make one last ditch effort before leaving the area, and see if we can go at night, sleep on the DL in our truck and hike at sunrise. And then we realize there's a full moon that night. So we drive up to Devil's Garden, take a nap and then wake up around midnight with this amazingly bright and huge full moon and set out on our hike. It was just incredible seeing the Arches at night like that. Was something truly too magical to put into words. We did most of the hike silently because it was just so magical and it felt right not to fill up with conversation. Near the farthest part of the trail, heading towards Landscape Arch, there's a spot where the trail passes through a little narrow valley thing. The trail is high, and there's some bushes down below the trail on both sides, and then there's high cliffs with swifts, birds, singing loudly on either side of that. When we're passing through, I hear this tiny but distinctly weird noise in the bush, almost like the sound of quickly rubbing your hands together a few times. Everything seemed pretty normal, though, and I figure we just startled a bird or a deer or something. We hike to Landscape Arch, sit for a while, and turn around to hike back. When we get to exactly the same spot in the trail, I hear the same noise again, only this time a lot closer to us, and the bird suddenly went completely silent. My brain, the hair on the back of my neck, and everything within me just started screaming mountain lion. I didn't want to panic my partner, so I just said, "I think there's something here. We need to keep walking and I don't think we should stop," and I started clapping my hands together with each step. We hiked the whole way back to the car, feeling it following us, fighting the urge to break out in a run, and being way too terrified to stop or turn around look. Getting close to the parking lot, the trail opened up one last time and we both felt it stop following us. The creepy sensation just melted away. When we're back in the parking lot, he looks at me and says, "So we just spent the last 20 minutes being followed by a mountain lion, right?" And I'm like, "Yep." Told a ranger what happened the next day, she was like, "Yep." Needless to say, though it was magical for a while, I don't recommend silent night hikes. And don't fucking hike alone in the evening or overnight. We're both tall, big, healthy looking people and we're walking close together, otherwise I feel very certain one of us would have been Big Meow Mix. When camping with a friend and a group of their friends in a backwater part of West Virginia. The campground we were going to camp at was full, poor planning on our part. The one guy drove down from DC for this, so we decided to look around for a place. We find this area that looks like it was a parking lot at one point long ago. It was nice and secluded, plenty of wooded space to set up tents. My husband and I decided to go to bed around midnight. We are awoken sometime around 1 in the morning. Some drunken guys pulled into our random secluded area and wants to join us. The group declines, telling the guys it is rather late and they happen to catch them right as they were getting ready to go to bed. Guys get pushy about joining the group keeps declining. "It's been a long day, it is late, we have a long trip ahead of us tomorrow." Suddenly the guy's tone changes. They want to know how the group found this spot, how long the group has been here, has the group been hiking at all, and how far into the woods we have been. The group answered, and suddenly the guys declared it was late and they really should be heading out, but wanted to know if the group wanted to buy any party favors before they left us for the night. Now maybe I've just seen too many horror movies, but I'm still convinced that those dudes were making drugs in those woods, and if the group's answers were anything other than what they were, there would have been 7 bodies in those woods before sunrise. Maybe I'm just being paranoid and they were just some drunk locals looking to have some more fun before they went home, but I doubt it. Drove up the east coast of Australia with some mates to camp in national parks and get ludicrously intoxicated. We brought with us a grog shop's worth of booze, bags of weed, and several handfuls of magic mushroom caps. Since I wasn't driving, I decided to eat 8 of the caps before we even left our border. By the time we entered the national park and started setting up our campsite, the sun was already setting and I was already hallucinating, meaning I was a completely unhelpful but hilarious mess of a camper. Cute grilling over the fire, drinking whiskey and smoking gigantic doobs. At around midnight my normal bodily functions returned in earnest, and we realized that we hadn't even looked for a dunny, shitter, outhouse, long drop, before it got dark. So I grabbed a roll of shit tickets, turned on my headlamp, clutched a gigantic hunting knife between my teeth, and strolled 100 or so meters to take a dump in the river. Imagine a drug-crazed man with his pants around his ankles squatting on a riverbank clutching a gigantic fuck-off hunting knife between his teeth, with the light from his headlamp darting around the darkness. Everywhere I pointed the light I would see rotten, decrepit zombies shambling out of the bush around the riverbank. Never have I defecated so quickly, all the while hyperventilating and freaking out about the hallucinatory undead coming to feast on my flesh. After I got back to the campsite, the night went as well as any drug-fueled campout goes. Woke up the next morning, stepped out of my tent to take a piss only to find a public toilet block not 50 meters from our campsite. I have never laughed harder at myself than I did that morning. And that's the story of the most terrifying shit I've ever taken, in a national park no less. Not even 6 months ago, my husband, my 10-year-old bonus son, he just turned 11, myself and our dog, went on some family road trip from Portland, Oregon, the area we live, to Mount St. Helens, on the outskirts of Courage, Washington. We drove around and just kind of veered off at random down a road that looked like it may have potential hiking areas. We ended up parked at the beginning on this blocked off road where only foot traffic could carry on. We started at the very bottom of the mountain, passed by a few people that were walking back towards us in the opposite direction. As we started to walk further, they gave us a shout out that any further was patched of unmelted snow and patched ice, to which we carried on anyways. Without us as a family really have a plan. We looked on a map on our phone and realized we were on a trailhead that lead up to Climbers Bivouac, so we decided that would be our turnaround spot. Not thinking anything of it, it's a 3-mile hike. Regardless of it being a bit of a stretch, we still had a very fun and joyful time. As we got higher though and closer to Climbers Bivouac, the ice/snow was getting deeper, and for the most part throughout the first 2/3 of the way, was only in shaded areas. The last 1/3 of the hike however, and especially after reaching our turnaround spot, the snow/ice was over 5 feet deep and we were having to carefully push through since we had accidentally stepped in some soft spots that pulled our legs in. So it was very tedious. After turning around and starting to make our way back down, I had noticed that our dog had suddenly became closer and more at our sides, making way back. This threw me off because the entire way up he was running ahead, around, playing and just loving life freely and a little more ahead of us. But I thought nothing of it. I was and still am fully aware that up in that area there is mountain lions and other sorts of predators that are known to us, and I'm sensible enough to know predators not for sure known to us. So I immediately realized our dog was on alert about something. But he seemed to just be going along up ahead with my husband as my son and myself tailed a little behind. That when we heard it the first time. From the brush, trees and wilderness about 20 to 25 feet behind us, to my guess, we heard something pound on the ground and let out an ape-like noise. Ooh, ooh. Like almost the same noise gorillas will make on National Geographic when they are giving off a territory warning, but a little different, a lot deeper and more sinister. My son and I froze, looking at my husband and furry companion for reassurance. With my voice shaking I asked my husband, "Did you hear that?" He replied in a reassuring manner, "Oh, that was Spike." He started gauging and was gasping after, Spike was our dog. I questioned it, knowing for certain what I had heard and from what direction, not only to mention I've seen my dog get gagged or sick plenty before and had never heard him make a noise like that. Regardless of my questioning, I believed him. We continued along, briefly feeling reassurance, until we heard it again. But a huge problem being, it was closer. I'm talking no more than 6 to 10 feet off to my right, into the brush of wilderness. This time, I just so happened to be focused on my dog at the time, watching his movements, and now I knew for certain my husband had lied for the sake of keeping us calm. This was not even half a mile of our way back down. So we had just a little over 2.5 miles left to go. The remainder of our way down, we heard nothing but some branches snapping. But based on my dog's behavior, whatever it was, followed us the majority of the way down, leaving us be about a quarter mile from our car. I will never forget that day. And I promise you, especially after that event, I never go out in the wild without packing something. Not so much what I saw but what I dreamt. I was in Sequoia National Park last year camping in the bed of my truck. Before I went to sleep I crawled up on top of a boulder to look at the stars. While up there I found mortar bowls and sharpening crevices left there by Native American tribes. In the middle of the night I thought I woke up and suddenly I was no longer in my truck or near any kind of campground but in the middle of the forest in my sleeping bag. I looked to the left of me and there was what appeared to be a writhing mass of hundreds black eel-like snakes slithering past me on the ground. Then out of the mass of snakes a rattlesnake appeared and attempted to bite me through my sleeping bag. After kicking out a few times it re-entered the column of snakes and disappeared. I then looked to see where the snakes were going and they were crawling into the sliced open stomach of a large black horse that I was resting my head on. After seeing that gave me such a scare that I woke up jumping out of my truck. To this day I've never had a dream like that and I'm not much of a superstitious man but I feel it had something to do with the carvings in the rock and the spirits of those who lived there before. There's a national park a few hours drive from us that my family likes to camp in every year. We usually drive down old logging roads and find random locations to camp in instead of using the campground. It's more private and we've found some awesome spots over the years. When I was 13 we found a really cool spot nestled between two large ponds. You follow this logging road for a few miles and then it slowly starts to turn into overgrowth. Lots of little hills and down trees, tall weeds, etc. At the time we didn't have a vehicle capable of 4-wheel drive so we lugged our gear on foot and set up on the hill between the ponds. Everything went smoothly until about 2 a.m. Out of nowhere 2 massive black trucks came roaring in. These trucks were literal clown cars, jam-packed with dudes. They completely ignored our camp, completely ignored our family asking WTF they were doing so late, didn't pay us any mind at all. They all got out of the trucks, waded into the ponds with nets, spent a little over an hour kidnapping frogs, piled back into their trucks and left with the frogs from the pond. They did this completely silently. No lights, no talking, just quietly walking through the pond skimming nets along. When we arrived, the ponds were overrun with frogs and listening to them all was really cool. After the frog kidnapping, the ponds were silent and still. The following morning we found a lone survivor with an injured leg and returned him to the pond. But the ponds stayed silent the rest of the camping trip. Frog isn't a terribly popular dish around here but I assume they took the frogs to eat. The silent abductors were super strange though. You'd think they'd be like, whoa hey sorry to intrude. Just frog hunting. Or that they'd at least use flashlights. We've camped that spot a few times since then and we've never encountered the frog kidnappers again. The following year, same park but different spot, we got robbed by a bear. Someone left an open pack of marshmallows in the beer cooler and didn't shut the lid correctly. We woke up sometime in the very early morning hours to see a black bear casually carrying off our cooler. That morning we did recover the cooler, but the marshmallows were gone and he squished a few beer cans in the process of his theft.